Hi, welcome to the Assessment, Inventory, and Monitoring AIM Data Use webinar series. During the course of this series, we have been exploring the use of AIM data at various scales. Many of you have previously joined us, but for those of you who are new to Teams Live, you are muted. Please participate by utilizing the chat feature to ask questions. Please feel free to submit them at any point. When asking a question, it is helpful if you enter your name. Once questions are submitted, we will publish them for the audience to see. If you upvote another participant's question, it will move up the queue. The presentations are being recorded, and BLM users can find them on the AIM SharePoint. The AIM SharePoint and aim.landscapetoolbox.org have links to upcoming presentations. Our external partners can watch the live presentations, and we are working on a way to make the recording shareable externally as well. Thanks for joining us today. Today we will be having Interpreting Indicators of Rangeland Health version 5 with Nika, Lepak, and Jenni Moffit. Nika is a rangeland ecologist with the NOC, and Jenni is a resource soil scientist with USDA NRCS. Facilitating the conversation will be Alita Napis and Lauren Price. Go ahead and share your presentation, Nika.
Thank you everyone for joining today. This presentation has been developed to give an overview of interpreting indicators of rangeland health protocol and the highlights of the update to version 5 of the technical reference, which will be published in the next month or two. So an overview of the presentation we're giving today. Part 1, I'm going to talk about sort of the history and genesis of IIRH and how it was developed over time, and cover the intended applications and most common uses of the protocol. I will also briefly cover the overall structure and conceptual framework for the protocol and highlight some of the major updates and clarifications that you'll see in version 5. Next, Jenni will present an overview of the protocol process in applying the technique presentation. And to wrap up, I will show you a current example of using IIRH along with AIM core methods and other quantitative data collection to support a BLM rangeland health assessment. So IIRH originated out of an effort with the National Research Council reviewing the efficacy of agency assessment and monitoring practices. The committee recommended ecological indicators to better characterize the health of rangelands. They focused on soil stability, watershed function, nutrient cycling, and recovery mechanisms. At the same time, a Society for Rangeland Management Committee recommended that rangeland assessments focus on maintenance of soil at the site. These two groups came together and agreed on a definition for rangeland health. This definition is the degree to which the integrity of the soil, vegetation, water, air, as well as the ecological processes of the rangeland ecosystems are balanced and sustained. So following the NRC report, the NRCS and BLM developed interagency versions 1 and 2 of IIRH. These were a little bit sort of less involved versions than what we have now. These were developed and tested over time during the late 90s until, which resulted in the development of version 3, which was published in 2000 as an interagency reference. Following publication of version 3, there was a publication of a peer-reviewed journal article in Journal of Rangeland Management, which was then followed by refinements to the protocol that were published in version 4 in 2005. The author and instructor cadre now includes members from the BLM, NRCS, USDA, ARS, and the U.S. Forest Service. So now that version 4 has been used for 15 years and both BLM and NRCS sponsor classes to provide instruction to hundreds of field practitioners each year, the IIRH cadre of authors and instructors have used this experience to develop version 5 of the technical reference, which is in the final formatting stages currently and should be available in early fall. Provisional draft versions of version 5 were used for teaching and the measuring and interpreting indicators classes in 2018 and 2019. So refinements to the protocols have been field tested and user feedback has been incorporated into the final technical reference. So stepping back to the concepts of IIRH, it is a qualitative assessment protocol that provides a moment-in-time snapshot of the functional status of an area. Although it is qualitative, many of the 17 indicators can be supported by quantitative measurements. So the types of land where IIRH can be applied to include rangelands, which has been the focus of development of the protocol, including grasslands and mixed grass and shrublands. The protocol can also be used in woodlands with an open tree canopy structure. And version 5 also clarifies that the protocol can be applied in ephemeral systems that don't support riparian vegetation. These are areas that typically hold water for less than 30 days each year. It's important to understand the intended uses of IIRH. So IIRH is intended to be used within the context of a landscape classification system such as ecological sites or equivalent units. It's intended to be used with an appropriate reference sheet describing the natural disturbance regime within the natural range of variability for the 17 indicators at a given site. It should only be used by people who are knowledgeable and experienced with the protocol and the ecological system being evaluated, including formal training or working closely with others who have training and experience. And it is a valuable tool for communicating fundamental ecological concepts to a wide variety of audiences. The protocol can be used, or is intended to be used, to provide a preliminary evaluation of the 3 attributes of rangeland health by rating all 17 indicators and considering them in each attribute rating. It's intended to improve communication by focusing the discussion on critical ecosystem properties and processes. It can assist in identifying monitoring priorities and selecting monitoring sites, and assists land managers in identifying areas that are at risk of degradation and where resource problems or restoration opportunities exist. However, the protocol is not intended to be used to identify the cause of resource problems or independently make grazing or other management changes, used independently as a monitoring or trend determination tool, or to independently generate national or regional assessments of rangeland health. Some applications that are where IIRH are most commonly applied include BLM rangeland health assessments, which I'll talk about later in this presentation. And it's also used for integrated grazing land assessment and assessment of road impacts on rangeland health. There's a published paper discussing the applicability to looking at road impacts. And it's also frequently used for NRCS ranch planning. There is an asterisk by the NRCS ranch planning bullet because in that protocol, typically NRCS uses the indicator ratings individually to focus ranch management planning, but does not use the full attribute rating protocol that is recommended by IIRH. So at its foundation, IIRH compares a suite of 17 indicators against expected conditions described in a reference sheet for an ecological site. The protocol is applied at the ecological site scale so that observers can understand the potential of the site they are evaluating. The IIRH assessment relies on having a description of reference condition for each of the 17 indicators. These descriptions are usually found in a reference sheet that is part of an ecological site description. Indicators at the evaluation area are compared against the description to determine the level of departure. In this example, a mountain big sagebrush ecological site in reference condition is shown on the left. The hypothetical evaluation area on the right might show departure in expected condition for indicators related to vegetation composition, such as the functional structural groups and invasive plants indicator. because absence of fire in this case has allowed trees to increase beyond what is expected for the site under the natural disturbance regime. So the 17 indicators are related to 3 attributes of rangeland health. As I've mentioned, the IIRH protocol is focused on assessing the functionality and sustainability of ecological processes. The indicators are rated to support overall assessments of the 3 attributes of rangeland health: soil and site stability, hydrologic function, and biotic integrity. A subset of the 17 indicators are used for assessing each of these 3 attributes. Some indicators relate to only one attribute, while others relate to 2 or all 3 attributes, as shown here. 10 indicators are related to soil site stability and hydrologic function, and 9 indicators relate to biotic integrity. Both the indicators and attributes are rated based on observed departure from the reference condition. When an indicator at an evaluation area resembles the reference, it is rated as none to slight. As departure from reference condition increases, the ratings go from slight to moderate, moderate to extreme, and extreme to total. Returning to our hypothetical mountain big sagebrush community, observers would use the reference sheet along with an evaluation matrix to guide their ratings for the 17 indicators. The descriptions in the evaluation matrix help to assign the departure ratings consistently. Here, the generic evaluation matrix for litter cover and depth is shown. However, ecological site-specific matrices can be developed and attached to the reference sheet for even further consistency. So, some notable changes that you'll see in version 5. Some of the indicator names have changed. There is clarification that the IIRH reference is the natural range of variability as determined by the natural disturbance regime for the ecological site. The relationship of indicators to quantitative methods is clarified and expanded. And functional structural groups table has been added to the reference sheet, and a new functional structural groups worksheet has been developed. And lastly, a reference sheet checklist has been added to improve the development and completeness of reference sheets. So the indicators that have had changes to their names include wind scoured, blowouts, and depositions. The term blowout has been deleted from that indicator name. Number 10, effects of plant community composition and distribution on infiltration, is the new name for indicator number 10 to more specifically describe what is being assessed with that indicator. Number 13, dead or dying plants or plant parts, has also been changed to more directly describe what's being assessed. Litter cover and depth has been modified slightly to include depth. And vigor, with an emphasis on reproductive capability of perennial plants, has also been changed for clarity. Okay, so there has been some confusion in the past about the range of variability that should be included in the reference sheet descriptions. Version 5 clarifies that the reference sheet should describe the range of conditions for each indicator that would occur on an ecological site functioning under the natural disturbance regime. The natural disturbance regime includes the historic fire return interval, native insects, and wildlife activity, but does not include non-native species, vegetation treatments, or domestic livestock use that doesn't mimic historic wildlife use patterns. Version 5 also provides additional information about measurements related to each of the indicators. Recommendations to use core methods have been emphasized to help build consistency in the protocol. In this table, AIM core methods are in bold. You might notice that the collecting line point intercept and conducting the soil stability test with quantitative indicators will give you quantitative indicators related to several indicators of rangeland health and all 3 of the attributes. So where appropriate in version 5, we recommend that the AIM core methods are used for the related indicators. Additional potential measurements are addressed for each of the 17 indicators. In addition, There is an Appendix 8 devoted to describing how to estimate production to rate the annual production indicator. Another key change is that a functional structural groups table has been added to the reference sheet requirements for indicator number 12. The functional structural groups table that describes the expected relative dominance of plant functional structural groups in the plant community phases that occur within the reference state. This table will become part of the description for the indicator number 12. Note that these tables are only available for a few ESDs at this point, so this table will need to be developed following the instructions in Appendix 1 prior to completing assessments using version 5. So there is also now a functional structural groups worksheet that there was a previous functional structural groups worksheet included in version 4, but that has been entirely changed. And the use of this worksheet is now being emphasized to use along with the evaluation sheet. This will help for documenting the plants that are observed in an evaluation area and to help consistently rate indicator number 12. Version 5 introduces 4 sub-indicators that are used to rate this indicator. This is really just teasing apart all of the factors that went into rating this indicator in version 4 to ensure that each factor is considered. Testing this at field trainings showed a significant increase in rating this indicator consistently using the worksheet and the 4 sub-indicators. We plan to give another presentation in the near future focusing on the details of developing the functional structural groups table and using the functional structural groups worksheet. Lastly, to assist with capturing the range of variability and creating complete reference sheets, version 5 includes a reference sheet checklist and guide to developing reference sheets in Appendix 1. The checklist can also be used to evaluate the completeness of existing reference sheets before they are used for assessments. More consistency and completeness in the reference sheets will make it easier to consistently rate indicator departures. To summarize, while we've made significant changes to the technical reference, we have taken great efforts to maintain consistency with previous versions. Therefore, interpretations made with version 5 should be consistent with version 4 at the attribute level, provided that similar reference information is used. Thank you, and I will turn it over to Jenny for applying the technique.
Hello, everyone. Like Nika said, my name is Jenni Moffit. I'm with the NRCS as a resource soil scientist, and I'm going to talk today about applying the technique, our 5-step process. So there's 5 main steps to completing the interpreting indicators for Rangeland Health Protocol. In general, the 5 steps include determining the soil and ecological site at your evaluation area, obtaining the correct reference sheet for that ecological site, and with the version 5 updates, that's going to mean that we also have our functional structural group tables, collect supplemental information, rate the 17 indicators, and lastly, evaluate those 3 attributes of Rangeland Health. Steps 1, 2, and 3 might be somewhat iterative depending on the type of project. Some projects may target specific ecological sites for assessment, while others might require assessing a particular location on the ground regardless of the ecological site that exists. So supplemental information about land management or natural disturbances might also influence the evaluation area. So we want to take that into account, and that might also influence the order of operations on this. So once an evaluation area has been selected, our first step is to determine our soil and ecological site, and that's done in the field. The soil and site verification section of the evaluation worksheet is used to document the site verification or site determination. The left side of that form is filled out with the expected reference information for the site. The right side is completed by making observations of the evaluation area and the soil horizon. So then the question becomes, how do we know what's expected? The soil survey is a great place to start for that kinds of information. If you grab your soil map and you can, like we have up in that upper right-hand corner, and we see that we have a map unit 484. This example would show us that we have a 9-mile reluctant complex that has components of 55% 9-mile, 30% reluctant, and 15% minor components or other soils that might be out there on the landscape. So something to consider is that map units commonly have more than one soil. And if you were to go and make a ecological site map in Web Soil Survey, it's going to show you the dominant condition out there. So you would only see claypan 12 to 16, which is associated with 9-mile. You wouldn't see that droughty loam 11 to 13 is also common on that site or in that delineation, and could very possibly be the site that you end up at when you go to visit your evaluation area. So it's important to come to the field prepared with that information about all the components that might be encountered. Then when you dig your pit and compare the observed properties of the different components, you'll be able to confirm which soil you're actually on and make a better ecological site determination. So it's really important to have that information ready ahead of time and make sure we're making the best calls, because that's going to determine which reference sheet you're pulling and really affect the quality of your evaluation. So the next step, once you've made that ecological site determination, is to obtain a reference sheet. The reference sheet, if it doesn't exist, would need to be developed. Usually it's attached to the ecological site description. The reference sheet describes the expected range of conditions for each indicator on the ecological site within the natural range of variability. So this is the benchmark to which these indicators at the evaluation area are being compared. Step 3 is collecting supplemental information. This information is needed to understand the weather and disturbances at the evaluation area. Quantitative information gathered at the evaluation area is useful to support the qualitative ratings for several of the 17 indicators. That's also supplemental information. So information about disturbances is used to determine the expected reference community phase at the site. So remember that the reference will always be the phase that would be developed under natural disturbance regime, so it will always be one of the phases in the reference state. In version 5, we more explicitly documented that process of selecting that reference phase, but the concept was also incorporated in those previous versions of the technical reference. The expected plant community composition is the factor that's most heavily influenced by the reference phase that's selected for the assessment. A few quantitative measurements or estimates are required to rate all of the 17 indicators. These include bare ground and litter cover estimates, estimates of annual production, and values derived from our soil aggregate stability tests. Once the site has been determined, a reference sheet obtained, and all that supplemental information has been gathered, you're ready to rate your indicators. So we do an evaluation for each individual indicator. It's recommended to use an interdisciplinary team to collectively rate the indicators in the field. 5 rating categories are used, none to slight being used for an indicator that's very similar to the conditions described in the reference sheet, while extreme to total represents an extensive level of departure for that given indicator. The evaluation matrix that will be in Appendix 2 of version 5 should be referenced when rating these indicators to ensure consistent ratings. We can develop ecological site specific matrix if that's desired, and that would give greater consistency and detail when completing those assessments. So here's an example of an evaluation area as compared to the reference description for indicator 1. Because there's no rills visible in the evaluation area, the site's within the expected condition and would be rated none to slight. In this example for the bare ground indicator, the reference sheet states that 10% bare ground is commonly expected, though 20 to 35% bare ground may occur based on weather, disturbances, or other topographic positions. Bare ground in the photo appears to be much higher than expected and might be rated as moderate to extreme or even extreme, depending on the supplemental information known for the site. Many indicators can be rated using a combination of qualitative observations and quantitative data. In this example, bare ground was measured using a line point intercept, and the size and connectivity of the bare patches was observed. Although total bare ground was slightly higher than expected, the patches were within the expected range and rarely connected, so bare ground was rated as slight to moderate departure. Once the 17 indicators are rated, the ratings are used to assign final ratings to the 3 attributes of rangeland health using the preponderance of evidence approach. This means that 1 or 2 more extreme departures related to an attribute might be given more weight than several none to slight ratings for the same attribute. Version 5 includes a discussion about the impacts of indicator departure on each of the attributes. These tables should be referred to assist with rationale when assigning those final attribute ratings. So with that, I will turn it back to Nika, and she's going to give us an example of using the protocol.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Okay, so to wrap up, we wanted to show a current example of evaluations being applied on the ground using IIRH version 5 and how the evaluation is integrated with quantitative data collection in the Owyhee Field Office. In this case, the BLM is preparing to evaluate rangeland health standards at the grazing allotment level. This is the Sucker Creek allotment, which is located in the Owyhee Field Office right on the Oregon-Idaho border. The Sucker Creek allotment is mostly in sage-grouse habitat and was burned in the 2015 Soda Fire, which was a large fire, about 250,000 acres. So seedings and other post-fire treatments have been applied recently to assist post-fire recovery. IIRH evaluations were conducted and other data were collected prior to the Soda Fire, but the field office now has a need to update that information to complete a current assessment of the conditions in light of the fire and the subsequent treatments in that area. An integrated approach is being used to collect data about upland condition on the allotments using IIRH and quantitative methods. This information will be used to evaluate the Idaho standards for rangeland health, primarily Standards 1, which is watersheds, and Standard 4, native plant communities. The rangeland health attribute ratings for soil and site stability and hydrologic function will help to evaluate whether conditions on the allotment are contributing to proper nutrient cycling, hydrologic cycling, and energy flow as described under Standard 1 for watersheds. The biotic integrity attribute rating will help to inform the health of the vegetation community relative to the soil type and climate. In addition, the Sucker Creek allotment is designated as sage-grouse habitat, and so part of the land health assessment process will include completing a habitat assessment framework assessment and looking at site scale conditions for sage-grouse on the allotment. So this is a map of the Sucker Creek allotment showing the dominant ecological sites in the area. It's comprised of 4 pastures, and there's a distribution of 4 dominant ecological sites in the pastures. This map is based on the expected dominant ecological site as based on the soil map for the area. So the stars show the areas that they had previously collected data and wanted to go back to collect post-fire data and complete new IIRH assessments. They had originally selected these points using randomization to get points in each pasture and to represent the dominant ecological sites in the allotment. So the first step before going out into the field was to create a functional structural groups table, because that had not yet been developed for the ecological sites in this area. So I should say they had to develop a functional structural groups table for each of the ecological sites that they plan to conduct an evaluation in. So just as a reminder, that functional structural groups table is attempting to describe the community phases that exist in the reference state for each ecological site. And so this is an example of one that they would have developed for the sagebrush ecological sites that are in that allotment. So here they have 3 or 4 phases for this ecological site, and they've listed the dominant, subdominant, minor, and trace components that are expected within each one of those community phases. And also because they know that there was a recent fire in that allotment, they are going to use phase 1.4, which is the post-fire community phase, as their reference for evaluating IIRH in this area. So they are doing an integrated approach with quantitative methods so that they can ensure that they're answering all of the questions that they have, both about watershed and vegetation community, and also sage-grouse habitat conditions on the allotment. So they're following mostly AIM protocols to complete that. They're establishing an evaluation area with a 30-meter radius within one ecological site. The ecological site is determined using a representative soil pit near the plot center, following the process that Jenni just described. They are laying out 3 25-meter transects in a spoke design, which is sort of a standard for most AIM plots. And they're collecting line point intercept to get cover data there. They're collecting vegetation height, which is used for the sage-grouse habitat assessments. They're collecting species inventory, which can be used for diversity and developing that functional structural groups worksheet, and is also used to inform the forb availability for sage-grouse. And they're also conducting a soil stability test, which will inform IIRH. Supplemental methods that they're conducting are recording sagebrush shape for sage-grouse, and also recording a second herbaceous vegetation height for sage-grouse, since part of the indicators that are looked at for site scale habitat include heights for grasses and forbs. One additional method that they're conducting is looking ahead towards renewing the grazing permit on this allotment. They determined that it would be useful to have estimates of forage production, so they're also estimating production on the site and using those numbers to also support the rating for the annual production indicator for IIRH. So after the team has kind of set up the plot and broken up and collected that quantitative data that I just discussed, that gives them all a chance to get a pretty good look at the plot and observe indicators as they're collecting data. So then they come back together, and if they feel that they need to, have some group discussions, they do so to look at the indicators more specifically. In this photo, Leanne and Colleen are discussing water flow patterns and what they're observing as far as the extent and continuity of water flow patterns on the site. And everybody comes back together as the ID team and rates the 17 indicators using a consensus approach and assigns final attribute ratings to complete each IIRH assessment. This information will be combined with other available data such as post-fire treatment monitoring, trend plot data, and any terrestrial AIM plots on the allotment in the Rangeland Health Assessment, and will be used to evaluate the standards for rangeland health for the uplands in the Sucker Creek allotment. And with that, Jenni and I can take any questions that are out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nika and Jenni. Let's see, we have one, looks more like a comment, but maybe I'll just read it out loud to you and see what you think about it. The reference sheet should define how bare ground was determined, ocular estimate versus aim. The reference sheet should define how bare ground is determined, ocular versus line point intercept. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, actually, we did add a field on the evaluation form in version 5 to document the types of data that were collected and the methods that were used. And there are locations to write in the bare ground numbers that are used as well. But it is important if there's a lot of quantitative data being collected, like if it's at an aim plot, it's important to keep in mind to keep that quantitative data linked to your evaluation so that you can follow back and understand what data was associated with that evaluation.
Awesome, thank you so much. I guess I read that twice. We have another comment / question from Cassie. Cassie says, you all mentioned the use of quantitative data, LPI, to inform some IIRH indicators, such as bare ground and litter. However, ESDs, especially old range descriptions, reference information is often based on ocular data. How do you reconcile these differences when using the quantitative data for evaluating IIRH indicators? And vice versa if using ESD reference sheet values for benchmarks when evaluating AIM data?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do have a discussion of that in the technical reference, but it's important to understand where reference information came from. We are hoping that with increasing AIM and LMF data, that will be really useful to update a lot of those numbers for things like bare ground. Another issue with bare ground is that often biological soil crusts were called bare ground in the past, and so sometimes reference sheets have high numbers for bare ground because that included biological soil crusts.
And I think people who develop those sites too, I mean, our protocols and our handbooks and stuff are improving for what we need to be collecting to write those ecological sites and those reference sheets. And we're wanting to collect more and more of the AIM style line point intercept data. It's just a lot of sites to get through at one time. So, I mean, these are iterative products. We should be gaining more information and making better calls and updating them as appropriate, I think.
Thank you. Let's see, Patrick says or asks, are there any established practices for translating from either quantitative data or IIRH indicators to land health standards? The land health standards for many states are very vaguely worded, and it's not clear how you get from any kind of data to health standards.
That's a good question. I mean, at least where I've worked the most in Idaho with land health standards, when we have IIRH information and qualitative assessments are showing more than a slight to moderate departure for attribute ratings, we start to think that there might be, standards that are not being met, but that's not a hard and fast rule. There is a lot of room for interpretation, and that's also why, it's important that people that are using IIRH are well trained and have a lot of experience with working in the ecological system that they're collecting information in. But yeah, it's very much, there's a lot of a professional judgment in the land health standard interpretations.
And Thank you, Nika. Patrick has a follow-up comment. There is even some disagreement that land health standards can be evaluated based on the condition of the land. So I don't know if you want to add a follow-up to that or not.
I'm not sure quite what the question is, but I'll think about that.
All right. Well, that is the end of the questions. Nika, Alita, do you want to give an announcement about kind of where all these recordings go? And
you can find that cleaned up recording on the BLM AIM SharePoint. And then on that SharePoint, you can also find our upcoming presentation list, and that same list is available on the external website aim.landscapetoolbox.org under training, webinars, and online resources. Thank you for participating today.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Nika. Have a good rest of your day.